That's reaction from the House of Commons just moments after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced Employment Minister Randy Boissonnault will be stepping away from cabinet immediately to, quote, clear allegations against him. Last week, Boissonnault had to apologize for shifting statements about his family's Indigenous heritage, and he's also faced scrutiny in recent weeks after reports a medical supply company he co-owned before his re-election in 2021 claimed Indigenous heritage to earn a government contract. He insists he didn't have anything to do with that. Boissonnault's stepping away from cabinet comes just one day after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau expressed support for him. Let's bring in the front bench to talk about that. Saeed Selvam is the Vice President and Practice Lead of Public Affairs at National Public Relations. Jamie Ellerton is a Conservative strategist and the founding partner of Canaptus Limited. Former interim NDP National Director Carl Bélanger is with us. He's now the President of Traction Strategies. And here in studio, Marika Walsh is a senior political reporter with the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody. Interesting 24 hours, Marika. Yeah. What changed from your perspective? What do you think? What are you hearing about? Yesterday, the Prime Minister says, I'm happy with the job he's doing on jobs, on Alberta. Just over 24 hours later, he's out of cabinet.
Well, I think what changed is the Prime Minister got back to Ottawa, and maybe he had a better sense then of just how heavy this was weighing on the Liberals, how often they are dealing with this in question period, in scrums. And what I heard from one person is a concern that given all of the stories that have come out so far, what could be next? Could something be next? So I think it could have just been one of those sort of make or break moments, but certainly a huge difference and something that caught off the Liberal caucus, who this morning was still defending him. So it's unclear, and Randy Boissonnault was not on the Hill this afternoon and has not said anything yet.
Yeah, Jamie, I was just speaking with MPs and asking the Liberal MP on the panel, like, is there any admission of wrongdoing here? And I think the wording is very specific in this, right? Like, he's stepping away from cabinet in order to focus on clearing the allegations against him. That's not the same thing as saying I booted him from cabinet because he did something wrong.
No, well, it's also part of how this government's playbook is they never actually admit any fault or any wrongdoing. They always just kind of like, oh, we're going to do something different now because circumstances, and hope it just goes away. And sometimes it actually does, which is why they do this. And other times it continues to be a long, protracted, dragged out affair. I think when you look at what's kind of materially changed, just kind of picking up what Marika was saying, up until now, this has all been about spending related to his business activities that he may or may not have been directly controlling during his time outside of government before coming back into government during the pandemic. But now when you have issues that move beyond just government spending and are starting to look at stakeholder groups, especially for a government that's talked so boldly about reconciliation, done some stuff on it, but left a lot on the table that still needs doing, I think this is creating a far bigger political headache for them. And so he's become a political distraction. So no matter how much Justin Trudeau PMO speak they put into the statement, even making it sound like perhaps he's on a leave of absence, is he still getting his cabinet minister salary? Is he still giving his cabinet minister car and driver while he steps away from his responsibilities? All these things are quite ambiguous, and the government just hopes this goes away.
Yeah, we thought they were a little ambiguous as well. So our producer, Rachel Swatek, reached out to the Prime Minister's office to ask Saeed, and he's fully out of cabinet at the moment. But I do think Jamie's point is a salient one, that the possibility exists he could go back in. At least the statement leaves you with that impression. I don't think there's very much chance that ends up being the case, but the door seems to be left open, at least vis-a-vis the statement.
Yeah, very, very unlikely that he would be asked to come back in, especially if there happens to be a cabinet shuffle within the next few months. Look, this was a political liability for the Prime Minister, and objectively a very, very controversial issue that affects a major stakeholder group across the country. Indigenous people are not a monolith by any means or any shape or form. And at the end of the day, this is a government that has really prided itself on reconciliation efforts. So for something like this to happen under the Prime Minister's watch with a higher ranking cabinet minister is nothing but bad news. So, I mean, the resignation was telling, and it's only a matter of time to see what happens next.
What do you think of the time with which it took Carl, the Prime Minister, and the people around him to make this decision? I feel like we've had this conversation in other instances where, like, they are, dragged to a point, kicking and screaming. Maybe relative to that, it feels quicker. But this reporting has been going on for a while now. Like, the story has been brewing at multiple different levels, culminating in his apology last week, but for months, really.
I mean, I guess the international travel came into play here and how long it took for the Prime Minister to make a decision. But the real question is,
Yeah, I think that the Prime Minister's office felt he was an asset in a lot of instances as well, Marika, on his files, but also in particular in Alberta, right, where they have no representation. They have only 2 MPs. That was sort of indicated in the Prime Minister's statement yesterday when he said, I'm happy with his work on jobs, on the workforce, and Alberta. But clearly even that couldn't outweigh like the scrutiny Boissonnault is facing.
Yeah, it's important for a government to have representation in all provinces. They now have a cabinet without somebody from Saskatchewan or Alberta, right? They didn't actually want that situation. And we'll see how or whether they decide to address that whenever the shuffle that we keep hearing about actually happens.
Sometime in the next
but there's now,
few years,
Anita Anand and Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor with double portfolios because this shuffle does keep getting pushed back, right? So, look, it is a challenge for them to not have that voice from Alberta who can be sort of the government's representative in Alberta, but it's also a challenge to be dealing with the issues that are constantly coming rapid fire, and credit to the National Post for all their reporting on this, that has just been this constant drip of new revelations that become harder and harder to explain.
And I guess it's in that vein, Jamie, I was wondering today if this like sort of blunts the fallout from all of it, or if you anticipate there's more to come.
I would anticipate there's more to come just because it's been such relentless drip, as Marika just alluded to. And I think it kind of shows, quite frankly, just how paralyzed this government is in everything that they're doing, or more importantly, not doing. If the Prime Minister being on a foreign trip, going to a bunch of bilateral, multilateral summits, prevents them from like kind of dealing with a pretty rudimentary political problem back home for like a second-tier cabinet minister, like just think of all the other things not getting done because of the bottleneck in PMO. And any time the government charter goes up in the air, the government essentially ceased to operate. Like that is an absolutely scathing indictment, perhaps even worse than anything else we've heard so far.
What do you think about that, Said?
I completely agree. At the end of the day, when it comes to a cabinet minister losing their position, there's likely internal staff shuffles that happen, and work can essentially get put on the back burner, and other work can get elevated depending on what happens internally in some of these offices. So it's not good for anybody. And again, this also brings up the issue of procurement practices with the federal government. If you'll recall, about a year and a half ago, there was a huge controversy around the McKinsey consulting and the McKinsey contracts. And in this scenario, when it's about specific contracts and specific bidding that is designed to help benefit certain groups that are oftentimes not benefited in the public discourse or public service, when you have a cabinet minister who is accused of essentially using his influence to essentially help one of his businesses that he's associated with, it becomes an even larger problem down the road as well.
Taking a few steps back, Carl, like what's your assessment of where things are at for the Liberals at the moment, like particularly the people in and around the Prime Minister? A couple weeks ago, we were talking about his potential resignation. He survived the so-called revolt or the so-called coup, whatever you want to call it. They're back in Parliament this week, but only sort of, because as we've been talking about, he's traveling. They're now faced with this additional controversy. It's 5 cabinet ministers, if you're counting, that need to be replaced in the next election, just those who have stepped aside or stepped away in the last month. Like, what's your assessment of where things are at for them?
My assessment is that the HMCS Trudeau is still sinking. That ship is not coming back to shore. And the way they're reacting shows that they are not able to change course, change direction, to be nimble. And you need to be nimble now. And it showed, in fact, in the answer the Prime Minister gave to the question from Pierre Poilievre, which was not effective at all, fell flat, even though this could have been a very good attack from the Liberals, if not for the fact that they had their own problem.
You cut out the last point, but I'm going to guess what you're saying could have been effective if not for the fact that they had to get rid of a cabinet minister today. I got to leave our conversation there. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate the discussion. Our front bench, Marika Walsh, Said Selvam, Jamie Allerton, and Carl Bélanger.